Hi, Misha here, and we're wrapping up a look at British military jets, and we're going to get to this plane here, the Eurofighter Typhoon, something almost as famous and infamous as the Lockheed F-35 Lightning. But first, let's look at, really in a way, its immediate predecessor. This is the Panavia Tornado, and this is the F-3 fighter interceptor variant, although the GR-1, GR-4 fighter bomber strike fighter is probably more famous and saw a little bit more use. Just slightly different configurations, variations of the same airframe. Because this plane was designed to pretty much do many things and replace many other aircraft in the aging air fleets of Western Europe in the 1960s, 70s. Really, it all can be going back to around 1965 when Britain and France first tried to cooperate on a project to develop a variable geometry wing fighter-bomber strike craft. However, France very soon pulled out in 1967, and for a time, Britain was going to go with the General Dynamics F-111K Aardvark. However, that project was pretty much canceled in 1968, leaving Britain working on its own again for a variable geometry plane and looking for new partners. And of course, variable geometry means the wings can move. Anyone who's familiar with the F-14 Tomcat, that's exactly it. When they're fully swept back like this, it gives the plane high speed, and that it makes it a good strike. It can come in, it has a minimum silhouette, it can dive, but when the wings are fully extended, it gives better low speed performance, better maneuverability, and better cruise, more fuel efficient. So really, if you can get this, you get the best of both worlds. Also, with the wings forward, you get a little shorter takeoff. Well, initially, a committee was formed with many nations, kind of looking at trying to make one fighter to replace many fighters. This committee included Germany, Italy, France, Netherlands, Belgium, and Canada. Very soon, Britain got involved, and of course, very soon, France got uninvolved. And they would actually lure Belgium away, and they would go with the French Dassault Mirage. So this would continue. 1969, kind of a commitment was signed. Project would move forward. However, Canada would drop out because they did not like the politics behind, especially between Britain and Germany. And also they recognized that the whole project was very based on the needs of Western European nations, maybe not so much what they needed. And then finally, the Netherlands would drop out the next year because the fighter was getting more complex and expensive and convoluted. It really just needed something more or less simple to adopt its aging F-104 starfighters. Canada did as well. Leaving Britain, West Germany, and Italy. But they would work out a division of labor. Essentially, Britain and Germany would get the lion's share, a little over 40%, and Italy would be left with the balance, under 20%. They would basically get down to the two designs, a single seat and a two-seater. Germany wanted the single seat. Britain was more a fan of the two-seater, and ultimately that's what won out. And the original first prototype flew in the summer of 1974. It performed very well. 1976, production contracts were signed. In 1979, production really began with the first planes turning off the assembly line and being delivered to Germany and the UK, with Italy receiving its planes a short time later in 1981. The first squadrons started to become operational, started to convert to the Tornado in 1982, and were ready to go by June of 1983, meaning these just missed the Falklands War. And throughout 84, 85, and the rest of the 80s, these would start to replace some Jaguars and many of the Buccaneers in RAF service. So what do we have here? Well, this is a big plane. It's very long, not as big as a Tomcat, but it's still nearly 55 feet long. It has a wingspan that ranges anywhere from around 30 feet to 45. It's fast. It's Mach 2.2 capable. Back when I did the Lightning video, I pointed out that people like to say it was the first and only British jet to be Mach 2 capable in that sense. True, but that's not considering the Tornado is a British jet, which, Britain certainly contributed. Heck, even the engines were made by Rolls-Royce. Speaking of, it is a two-engine design. It is a two-seat design. The wings can sweep anywhere from 28 degrees out to 67 degrees. They were manually controlled, at least in the beginning, unlike with the F-14 Tomcat. Now, some later versions, after many upgrades, would have computerized wings. Kind of like the F-111 Aardvark, it actually has 4 pylons, 2 under each wing, and they can rotate the ordnance to keep it aligned with the front of the plane. An interesting but rather convoluted system. There are also 3 additional heavy hardpoints under the fuselage, and it can have 1 to 2 27mm Mauser cannon. This was designed primarily as a strike bomber or fighter bomber. However, reconnaissance and air defense, maritime patrol, all of these roles were secondary and very much considered when this plane was being developed. It was a 4th generation fighter. It had a hybrid fly-by-wire system. It had digital components, but it also had kind of analog backups. It used a digital data link or data bus system to communicate with other planes or the ground. It's one of the earliest planes to do this. It had a very advanced, for the time, terrain following radar, because this was originally designed to come in low and fast and take out enemy assets, namely at that time, of course, during the Cold War, Soviet missile bases, SAM sites, armor perhaps, depots, what have you. So with that in mind, it's quite advanced. But mostly it was just a very configurable plane. It was pretty much cleared to carry any official NATO air-launched ordnance, be they unguided, later laser-guided bombs, air-to-air missiles, air-to-ship, anti-ship missiles. It could drop mines. It also would soon be equipped with flare and chaff, as well as ECM. Just a very versatile plane. Throughout the 80s, the RAF would equip with the Tornado, the GR-1 as a ground attack, Then the F-1 and F-3. The F-3 was a dedicated interceptor variant, so it would mostly carry air-to-air missiles, whereas of course the GR-1 would carry bombs. Anyway, about 60 of these would be used during the first Gulf War in 1991. They would show quite well. The reports kind of argue over just how well, but they were seen to be very accurate and quite capable, but not invulnerable. 6 were lost during that war, but still it acquitted itself very well. And afterwards, this would continue to be used in NATO operations around Iraq, as well as other hotspots. Soon the GR-1 would be upgraded to the GR-4, which would have many, many upgrades and modernizations. GPS, for example, also night vision capability. And the idea was the GR-1 was a low-level strike craft. The GR-4 was designed to be more of a medium level, so the plane wasn't as vulnerable to anti-aircraft. The conversion program would kind of begin in 1997 and last through 2003. The final brand new Tornadoes would leave the Panavia production line in 1998 with about 990 built. The majority would go to England and Germany, with a smaller number going to Italy, and the only real major foreign purchaser was Saudi Arabia, who bought nearly 100. There would be many other upgrade programs over the years, mostly just keeping it modern. It would be used again during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. It would also be used to relieve Harrier GR-7s in 2009, and then more Tornadoes would be sent over in 2010 to Afghanistan. Interestingly, it was considered to retire the Tornado because of budget reasons, but instead they ended up retiring the Harrier fleet. So this would keep flying for a time. But at this point, its days were starting to get numbered because the design is getting rather long in the tooth, again, much like the F-14. Still, nevertheless, it would continue to be used in places like Libya and later Syria for strike missions. It was outfitted to fire and operate cruise missiles, as well as laser-guided paveways and such. So they did keep it up to date. But it started to get replaced by this plane over here, the Typhoon, and even more recently, the F-35 Lightning. By 2018, only 2 squadrons of Tornadoes were still active. By January of 2019, this year, they flew their last combat missions, and then kind of the February and March they would do kind of farewell touring and flyovers as they were being retired out of the RAF. And finally on April 1st of this year, the Panavia Tornado was officially retired out of RAF service, ending quite a distinguished career. Really, this thing was just as important for its political cooperation. Some did call it the most important fighter from Western Europe for the late 20th century. At one time, it was even expected to be in service until at least 2025, but, you know, times change. Pilots report it's a good handling plane, And as you've heard through me rambling here, it is very modular and adaptable and obviously quite upgradable for the many times they put it through upgrade programs. Anywho, this model is a 1/72 scale die-cast from Corgi. It's mostly metal, including the wings. They do move. The ordnance under the wings can be rotated manually to point them the right direction. Even the tail horizontals can be moved. It's a neat model. The only gripe I have is the wings are a little flappy, a little loose. At least compared to like the Hobbymaster F-14 and other swing wing type planes, but it's still not bad. Doesn't flop around too badly. This was actually, I think, my first Corgi, and I was duly impressed. It does have removable ordnance for the wings. And like I said in the beginning, this is the F3, so this is the Interceptor, the Eurofighter variant. So it's now retired from RAF service, but just. And it served the RAF for, well, nearly 40 years. It had a very good, respectable record. And is a uniquely European jet aircraft. And on that note, let's look at another unique European jet aircraft. And now, on to the Eurofighter. The F-2000 Typhoon, or RGF, and this is the Mark IV Typhoon if we're in Britain. And frankly, this fighter's story has much more to do with politics and business than it does the military. Again, it's kind of the European F-35 Lightning. And of course, since this video series is on the British RAF, we're mostly going to focus on Britain's involvement, which dates back all the way to 1971, when the RAF recognized the need for a new, fourth generation at the time, true supersonic fighter. What we might think of today as an air superiority fighter. The Jaguar and Tornado were very good at their roles, but neither one was a dedicated fighter. Well, initially, there was kind of a plan to work with France and Germany, but the very first plan fell apart quite quickly. Started in 79, was already over by 81. But a fresh new plan would arise, 82, 83. And we would end up having the UK, West Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. However, this program, known as the Agile Combat Aircraft, ACA, would again quickly fall apart because, frankly, France did not like the direction of the rest of the program. For one thing, it insisted that the new multinational plane be aircraft carrier compatible. The thing is, neither Germany nor Britain, not to mention Spain, had a use for this. Also, France wanted more of a controlling interest in Say. So again, France walked out, taking Spain with them. So, around 1984-85, the UK, Italy, and Germany would form the future European fighter program, which would lead to the foundation of the Eurofighter company in 1986. And despite France complaining, Spain would rejoin the program, meaning we back to 4 nations. Keep in mind that the UK, Germany, and Italy already had experience working together on the Panavia tornado. Anywho, the Eurofighter name had been used informally for years, but now we finally have a company with it, and it was basically a kind of a joint stock company with assets from British Aerospace, Airbus, and Air Italia. The first prototype would fly that year, and at this time it's still meant to be an air superiority fighter because we're in the Cold War. It would have a delta wing. It really wouldn't be set up for ground attack or anything like that. Just a dogfighter, just an anti-fighter, interceptor, if you will. However, funding was getting hard to come by in the late 80s. And then when the Cold War wrapped up, things really changed. After unification of Germany, basically the unified Germany tried to back out in 1991. It didn't have a need, it thought, and frankly, it went from having a pretty good budget to not so good. Not only did it have Eastern Germany to essentially rebuild and integrate into the West, the defense budget was slashed because of the end of communism throughout Europe. However, it wasn't able to get out of it due to commitments, so we continue on. But all the partners kind of cut back the number of planes they wanted. Britain wasn't so bad. Initially, they wanted to have 250 of the new Eurofighter. They only reduced that to about 230. Others, like Germany, who also wanted 250 originally, tried to go down as low as 140 at a time. Well, it was around 1992. The name F-2000 started to be used, designated. And then the real prototype, the real forerunner of this plane here, first flew in 1994. But then, 95-96, there was more contractual arguments and squabbling. Originally, the work share between the 4 nations was to be split, essentially a third for the UK, a third for Germany, and then the remaining third for Spain and Italy. But because of the reduction in numbers and Britain reducing the least, it's a bunch of background. You can read about it, but they argued over how much and that was kind of one of the big things. The Eurofighter wasn't to be manufactured in one nation. It was to be manufactured in 4 nations. And by that I mean each nation would assemble its own planes, but it would use parts supplied by all 4 nations. So only, for example, the left wing would be made in, I think it was Spain, or the fuselage would be made in England. And then the components would be shipped wherever and then put together there. So, it was a good, source of work if they could get it. and Britain felt since it was taking the most planes that it deserved more than 33%. Eventually it was agreed upon that Britain would get about 37%, and contracts would start to be signed in 1998. And by 2003, give or take, the first production planes were being tested and evaluated and trained upon. And the first RAF squadrons were reported operational between 2006 and 2008. In 2009, the British government played around with the notion of limiting its Eurofighter fleet to about 130. By the way, the Typhoon name was also officially adopted in 1998 once the contracts were signed. It was originally just an export name, but it kind of just stuck. Britain wanted to originally name it the Spitfire too. I like that name. I wish they'd gone with it. Germany didn't like it for some reason. Anyway, Britain considered reducing its number, but in the end really decided to more or less keep on with the original 230 commitment, maybe lowering it a bit, but close enough. And by 2011, the 100th British Typhoon rolled off the assembly line. Back in 2009, this plane here went into service in the Falklands. Previously, the defense squadron in the Falklands was armed with tornadoes. But they were replaced by Eurofighter Typhoons in 2009. Something Argentina wasn't terribly happy about. Can't imagine why. And in 2011, they started to be used in combat in places like Libya, used in conjunction with tornadoes, but eventually replacing tornadoes. It's also worth pointing out that starting back in 2008, they started to give the Typhoon more of a ground attack capability, because really air superiority fighters just that are only doing that are kind of limited importance or utility today. So they expanded the operational capabilities by adding the ability to deliver air-to-surface bombs, missiles. And actually, quite recently, 2017, they started working with being able to deliver anti-ship missiles as well. So they are expanding it beyond its initial envelope, but it is still very much a fighter. And once the Tornado was retired this year, just a couple months ago now, the RAF is trying to get more out of its existing Typhoons, and they're starting to be joined by the Lockheed F-35 Lightning as well. Well, what do we have here? By today's standards, this is a relatively small plane. It's about 52 feet long. It's got a wingspan of about 35 feet. It is Mach 2 capable. It's also capable of super cruise, about Mach 1.5. The previous Tornado had a ceiling of about 50,000 feet. This has a ceiling of about 65,000 feet, so it can really get up there and get there pretty quick. It has a total of 13 hardpoints, which is quite a bit, but keep in mind that originally it was meant to mostly be equipped with air-to-air missiles. Also, of course, can have drop tanks, and more recent versions can have bombs. It can also be fitted with the same 27mm Mauser cannon with 150 rounds that we saw in the Tornado. Has a standard crew of 1. Training versions, of course, are available, but that's not the thing. It is a delta wing design, as you can tell. It does have canards in the front. It's not a stealth plane, but they did what they could to minimize its signature on radar, especially head-on. So when it's coming in, it will present a relatively small radar cross-section, radar profile. This was primarily designed to be fast, very agile, very maneuverable, also very lightweight. It's not just a metal plane. It actually has a lot of advanced composites and synthetics that it's built from. Of course, it has all the modern avionics and whatnot in the cockpit, which have continued to be upgraded over time. But for all that, and it is a good plane, it's really overshadowed by all of its political history. And much like the F-35, cost overruns have been rampant with this design. It was never expected to be cheap, but as so often happens, it has ended up being much costlier than initially anticipated. And really, I said earlier about how these were assembled. I bet many of you already see the problem. Yes, it's good economically. It's also good for international relations to basically have the same plane deployed with you and your allies and to share the cost of manufacturing. Have some countries specialize in making fuselages, another making engines. The issue is, with only a sole source like that, shortages will inevitably occur. And that's what's happening in Britain. To keep their Typhoons flying, they often have to cannibalize other planes for the parts because Spain or Germany or Italy are late in delivering components they need, or something else might happen, shipping delays, things happen. So when critical components of your aircraft aren't made in your own country and you don't have the capacity to make them, it really opens up some really big windows for issues. And if there was ever another full war, this would be doubly so. To that end, there's already, thoughts of replacing this in Germany, in the UK, and of course, again, this isn't their sole plane. It's just one of those designs that went on for so long, and I think that the idea of having a shared design with the neighbors was appealing to enough people that it really got to be the too big to fail, frankly. Heck, it was in development much longer than it has been in service. It took over 20 years to get it in the air. And while it is a good plane, it's not a revolutionary. It's more of an evolutionary step forward. That said, I really like the actual design. The canards and the delta wing is a very neat look, and it's a very slim and trim plane. So, if nothing else, I do like how it looks. This model is 172 from Corgi. This is again a model of one of the defensive squadron planes used for the Falklands. It's a very chunky, solid feeling model with very little polymer. Your canards are polymer, but they do move, which is pretty neat. Your wing and all this is metal. The ordnance, the missiles come already installed, but the drop tanks you can have on or off, which is neat. And I think I already said it, but this is the FGR Mark IV variant. And as of June 2019, that's a very brief, very condensed version of the Eurofighter, Typhoon, and the British RAF. Again, not really focusing on the German, Italian, or Spanish right now today. That'll be for a different video. And of course, we will eventually catch up with France and get into the Mirages eventually. Anywho, I hope you've enjoyed this mini-series on British jets. It was fun to make. They're very neat designs. I like how they're kind of smaller, a little more elegant than a lot of the American designs. Just kind of a different change of pace. Alrighty, folks. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. Any questions or comments, please do post them below. Sincerely, do appreciate you tuning in and supporting the channel. And this is Misha, and I'll be back soon with some more silly model videos and whatever else I feel like next time. I will see you then.